Well, the DA has filed papers against the ANC in the High Court in Pretoria. It wants the governing party's cadre deployment policy declared illegal and unconstitutional. Last week, the party presented the End Cadre Deployment Bill to Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Public Service and Administration. It says it was designed to enforce merit-based appointments through the public service sector. For more on this, we can speak to the member of the Portfolio Committee on Public Service and Administration from the Democratic Alliance, Dr. Leon Schreiber. A very good afternoon to you, Doctor. Welcome to Daytime Update. So is cadre deployment the be-all and end-all as far as the reasons why the public service in this country is in such a state?
Good afternoon. Yes, indeed. Cadre deployment is fundamental to the decline of service delivery as well as the increase in corruption and ultimately state capture that we've seen over the last couple of years. Cadre deployment has obviously been in place since 1997 when the ANC officially adopted this policy, and over time it has slowly hollowed out South Africa's state institutions. The one important point perhaps to make just up front is that the problem with cadre deployment is that it extends political power and the political authority of the ANC into the administration. So this case is not about elected politicians who obviously should reflect the votes of the electorate. So that's everyone from members of parliament to councillors, ministers, the president. That is not affected by this case because those are democratic outcomes. What is affected by this case are government departments, municipal administrations, state-owned enterprises, every part of the public administration that is supposed to be non-political, independent and professional. It's there where cadre deployment has wreaked this havoc.
So to be clear, is your issue actually with cadre deployment or the deployment of people who aren't suitably qualified? Because the two aren't necessarily one and the same.
So if we win this case, which we are very confident of that we will, it will outlaw cadre deployment, in other words, political interference in appointments to the civil service. So it is the former. It is the practice of weighing political loyalty as the decisive criteria for appointment rather than merit and competence. We believe that whenever political loyalty or whether people are members or cadres of a particular political party is the decisive factor, then you politicize the public service and you turn it into a part of a factional and political game, as we've seen indeed in South Africa's public sector. So the only way to avoid this politicization of our public service is by enforcing independent and merit-based professional appointments. The other problem with cadre deployment, of course, is that it is something that happens in secret, and it actually bypasses the formal appointment processes as defined in the law. And what we've managed to expose earlier this year when we got these ANC Cadre Deployment Committee minutes was this practice where the ANC would actually meet in these secret meetings and decide beforehand who should actually be appointed, and they would sometimes disapprove of appointments, prevent appointments from being made, totally outside of the constitutional and legal setup. It's that which we are attacking to ensure that everyone who applies for a job actually has a fair chance.
But of course, cadre deployment is not unique to South Africa. Governments all over the world do the same, where political considerations influence who's appointed where. I mean, in a country like the United States, for example, it even goes into who's appointed to their highest court, the Supreme Court. Everywhere in the world, you see that happen in some form.
So there are important distinctions to draw between what are political appointments indeed and politicization in some contexts in different countries, but also the long history that a country like the United States has through something called the Pendleton Act. You see similar examples really in countries across the world which have sought to separate government departments and the bureaucracy from political parties. And so it's really about the principle of the separation between party and state. And of course, we have the South African Constitution as our guide, not another country's legal framework. And our Constitution in Section 1973 clearly spells out that no employee of the public administration may be favored or disadvantaged on the basis of politics.
Right.
It's very clear that cadre deployment violates that provision.
The point I was making, perhaps more broadly, wasn't about people who are actively members of an organization. With the example that I used of the US, was that even if you're not an active member, say, of the DA, you may be considered for appointment because of an ideological leaning. But let's move on from that, because you, as the DA, have also been accused of influencing appointments in George and the Western Cape, because the ANC leader there, Cameron Dugmore in the Western Cape, said at the time that You're pushing cadre deployment. An example was a letter from the DA, he said, sent to the George municipality. This was in 2018, discussing a vacancy of Director of Corporate Services and therefore making your stance on the issue hypocritical. How do you respond?
Well, it's a very important point to make that should we succeed in our court challenge here, cadre deployment is something that will become illegal for every political party to practice. So it's something that will apply across the board, and it's something that becomes increasingly important as our politics become more competitive. So we've already seen a number of coalition governments following last year's election, and we believe with 2024 on the horizon and the very real likelihood of a new government, potentially a coalition government, taking over following the ANC getting less than 50%, that now is exactly the time to prevent any political party from practicing cadre deployment whatsoever. As far as Mr. Dagmo is concerned, I'm very happy to hear that there is at least one member of the ANC who does not support cadre deployment, and I would actually ask him to come out publicly in support of our case and our cadre deployment bill as well.
So what you're not denying, though, is that the DA itself, even though it's not called cadre deployment, the DA itself has written to people in the organization to influence appointments at municipal level, i.e. the case in George, as alleged.
As far as that specific example is concerned, what I can say is that there is no committee ever in the DA that's come together to sit in secret back rooms and decide on appointments. I don't know who wrote that letter, but what I know is there's no cadre deployment committee in the DA, and the best of all is should we succeed in this case, then there can be no such animal in any political party.
So a letter that I got, an article written about what went on at the time says, in a letter signed by the then DA leader in the province, Western Cape, Anton Bredell, and sent to the mayor, speaker and chief whip and chairperson of council, this is in George, the DA complains to the municipality about not following party instructions when filling the vacancy. Here's a paragraph that was quoted in the reports at the time. It says, you are aware that appointments must be signed off by FedEx, the federal executive of the DA, it's the highest decision-making body in the party, and the following information is requested: the scoping report from the consultant and the recommendation that the consultant has made to council. So different perhaps in criteria to what the ANC has been practicing on cadre deployment, but still sounds like cadre deployment. So you too have done it.
Well, that's obviously something that the person who wrote the letter has to respond to. All I can say from my position is that any person who thinks cadre deployment is wrong should really rally around this court case. And that's exactly what I'm asking Mr. Dagmo and anyone else in the ANC who feels strongly about this to please participate in the process in Parliament as well, so that we can make sure that no political party can practice cadre deployment. And of course, the hypocrisy in this case comes from the ANC, to be honest, who has reams and reams of cadre deployment committee minutes. So it's quite rich for them to try and play this story up. Nonetheless, I'm very happy that he is supporting our stance.
What then happens if the court says no to your bid?
Well, I must say, I really don't envision that possibility. But what's very interesting going to be this week as well is the final Zondo report, of course, that's coming out on Wednesday. I think there's a very real chance that the Zondo Commission may end up vindicating a lot of what we've said in our court papers here. Certainly, if you read the tone of the state capture reports that have come out so far, and the specific paragraphs where they have touched on appointment issues, even though they've made it clear it will only be in the final report that they deal with cadre deployment comprehensively, I think there's a very strong likelihood that there will be more evidence coming out of those reports, which we can then add into our case. So I really don't think about that possibility at this stage. It's simply too important. We have to win this case, and we have to make sure we've got all our ducks in a row. So that's why we've been preparing for this case for months now.
And just to end, the current government, the ANC government at national level, will say to you that even though cadres have been deployed, there have been attempts underway to professionalize, as they say, the public service. We've got the National School of Government, for example, some of the ministers and other high-ranking officials we've seen often online posted attending lessons, short courses, shall we say, at this point. Do you think there's merit in appointing people and then upskilling them while in post?
Yes, absolutely there's merit to that. But the problem is, as long as the appointment process itself is not reformed, you are tinkering around the edges. So there's certainly space for those kind of initiatives. But the fundamental problem remains that while appointments are not done in a fair, transparent and merit-based way, with political considerations being decisive through cadre deployment, we're not going to end up appointing the right people with the right skills. So the real tragedy in this whole story is that President Ramaphosa did not use his testimony in front of the Zondo Commission to simply distance himself from cadre deployment and to say that it's something that has to come to an end. If he had done that, we would have been a long way down the road to building a professional and capable state. Unfortunately, he failed, and we will now do it for him.
Dr. Leon Schreiber, good to have your time. Thank you, sir.